was sworn in as President of the United States at 12 p.m. on January 20th, 2021. Just 1 day and 4 hours later, this happened.
Just filed articles of impeachment on President Joe Biden. We'll see how this goes.
We'll see how this goes. Biden had been president for less than 30 hours, but House conservatives decided that he had already committed high crimes and misdemeanors and needed to be removed from office. Since the very start of his administration, Republicans have been desperate to try and obscure and minimize the two impeachment trials of former President Donald Trump. And to do that, they aimed for Joe Biden to be the next American president to face the same humiliation. But that effort failed, and it failed in spectacular fashion. For 3 years, we have watched Republicans reach desperately for something, anything, that had even a hint of corruption they might pin on President Biden. But their efforts failed to turn up any convincing evidence that Biden or his family had engaged in corruption. Republicans did manage to wrangle one star witness who accused President Biden and his family of all sorts of wrongdoing. But it turned out that guy was just a dupe, passing along provably false information from people with ties to Russian intelligence. And he has since been arrested twice for lying to the FBI. Watching Republicans try to impeach Biden has been a lot like watching someone try to boil soup in a paper bag. Just a huge, embarrassing mess that accomplished nothing. And so Republicans then decided that they would try the next best thing. They would, if they could not impeach Joe Biden, they would impeach a member of Joe Biden's cabinet. And who better to be the victim than Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas?
Get rid of Mayorkas. He's derelict in his duty. This guy needs to go.
He deserves to lose his job simply because he has not followed the law.
Yeah, my view is, Sean, is that he needs to be impeached.
Secretary Mayorkas is in charge of the southern border. The Republicans wanted the southern border to be a key issue in this next election. So what could go wrong? Impeach him. Well, for starters, Republicans had the same problem that they always had. They didn't actually have any crimes to charge. Eventually, they settled on two made-up charges. The first was that Mayorkas failed to enforce the laws at the southern border, which simply wasn't true. In fact, under Secretary Mayorkas, there have been more deportations, returns, and expulsions than there were during the entire Trump administration. Republicans' second charge was that Secretary Mayorkas had lied to Congress when he said that the border was under control, which is exactly what it sounds like, an argument about the semantics of what the word control means, and very clearly not a high crime or misdemeanor. So these were not real charges. But Republicans decided to move forward with them anyway. Yesterday, House Republicans brought their two sham impeachment articles to the Senate, and today, Senate Democrats killed both of them. After a few hours of procedural wrangling, a majority of senators voted that neither of the two articles of impeachment was a high crime or a misdemeanor, and therefore the articles were unconstitutional. And that was it. Here was Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell just after that vote.
Madam President, we've set a very unfortunate precedent here. This means that the Senate can ignore, in effect, the House's impeachment. This is a day that's not a proud day in the history of the Senate.
Republicans, including Mitch McConnell, are angry today because they spent the better part of this year on this impeachment, and for what? They could have spent that time actually trying to fix our immigration system. Democrats negotiated one of the strictest bipartisan border bills in decades, something that would have been unthinkable just a few years prior. It gave Republicans almost everything they wanted on border security. But Donald Trump forced Republicans to kill that bill because he thought it might help President Biden. So instead of legislation, Republicans made a failed attempt to impeach someone who committed no crime on an issue they themselves refused to solve. It would be one thing if this was the only area where our government is breaking down because of the hollowed-out husk of what was once the Republican Party. But it is not. Because at the same time that all of this was happening in the Senate today, Republicans in the House of Representatives were also tripping all over themselves to benefit a strong man. Only this time the strong man wasn't Donald Trump. Right now, Speaker Mike Johnson is facing a revolt from inside his own party over his decision to finally put aid to Ukraine up for a vote in the House. Johnson had resisted doing that for months, but this week he finally relented. Here he was explaining the reality of what he is facing just a few hours ago.
I'm operating with the smallest margin in U.S. history. I have a one-vote margin. Listen, we're not going to get 100% of what we want right now because we have the smallest majority in history, and we only have the majority in one chamber.
Despite what Speaker Johnson understands here, far-right members of his party are now saying they will call a vote to oust Johnson over his decision to bring up Ukraine aid. And that's going to go to the floor for a vote. That is how much the far right does not want to help Ukraine combat Russia's war of aggression. And this is not just a problem for the Republican Party. It is a problem for Ukraine and America and the rest of the world. Because Ukraine and the vote on Ukraine funding has become a leverage point for Russia. The Washington Post has some explosive reporting today on newly revealed documents from inside Vladimir Putin's government. Documents which show how Russia is seeking to subvert Western support for Ukraine and disrupt the domestic politics of the United States and European countries through propaganda campaigns and supporting isolationist and extremist policies. Russia is fomenting division over Ukraine because it wants to weaken America's role in the world. In particular, one Russian policy expert cited in one of these documents specifically calls on Russia to continue to facilitate the coming to power of isolationist right-wing forces in America. Just to put a finer point on this, Russia very much wants the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world to continue doing exactly what they're doing because it serves Russia's interests. This is not the only piece of evidence we have of that. Last week, two top House Republicans warned that pro-Russian propaganda had infiltrated the Republican Party and was being repeated by Republican members of Congress in debates about Ukraine. Earlier this week, Marjorie Taylor Greene parroted Vladimir Putin's central lie, justifying his invasion of Ukraine by calling the Ukrainian government Nazis. Ukraine, for the record, is the only nation in the world other than Israel to have a Jewish head of state, Volodymyr Zelensky. But Marjorie Taylor Greene wants to block aid to that country because she says it is run by Nazis. So who knows where this vote on Ukraine aid could lead? Republicans could vote to remove Speaker Johnson and once again throw the House of Representatives and therefore much of our American government again into chaos, something that would directly serve Russia's ends. And maybe that is the whole point. Joining me now is Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from